Alright, welcome back to Mountain Road Ride, and as you saw in that intro reel, it's been a busy season of cycling here at Mountain Road Ride, but that has given me quite a lot of time to test out a few new products that I've added to my bike just before the summer of riding. Most notably, this tire from Pirelli, the Cinturato Gravel M 700 by 35C tire. Now, if you want to see a little bit more of that riding action that you saw in the intro, do check out the Gravel Ride of the Week playlist that I've got on this channel. There I have all the ride experiences well documented. But today we're going to look at this tire and how it's performed over, say, the last 800 miles or 1300 kilometers of riding. I'm going to share my thoughts and experiences with you in this video today. Right, so if you've been following along on this channel for some time, you will know that I've already reviewed this tire. This is the, I would say, the big brother to this particular tire. Actually, the little brother, I don't know. 650 by 50 millimeter tire. Same tire, Pirelli's Cinturato Gravel M, just in a completely different size. So this tire has done phenomenally well over all those months of riding. Now, since my review, I've accumulated a few more miles on this tire, and I still wholeheartedly stand by what I said. This is a phenomenal tire. It's done exceptionally well, especially when you are going over a little bit more extreme terrain and need that additional grip and traction. This is a really good tire if you can fit it in your frame, because that is one of the key things that I went for with this particular tire. It's a 50 millimeter tire, so it is right on the limit of what I can squeeze into my 3T Explorer's frame set. But it then came time to replace my 700C tire, and with the success that I've had with this particular tire, it made it kind of tricky to look beyond this tire and also Pirelli's offerings that they have on the gravel market. And ultimately, because of the success of this tire, I ended up going with the same tire, just in a different size. So in the 700 by 35C size. Now, they do make three options for the 700C. There's a 35 millimeter, like the one I've got here, the 40, and also the 45 millimeter tire. I'm going to share with you a few things about this particular size, the 35 millimeters, and why I think it might not be the most suitable for, at least for my type of requirements. Overall, it's a pretty capable tire, but not exactly what I had hoped for at the end of the day. So let's get into the spec sheet details, and you can see what this tire is all about. And then I'll share with you my sort of real world experiences and the performance that I've seen out on the actual gravel roads with this tire and how it's performed over the last few miles of riding. Alright, so let's start by looking at the tread pattern on this particular tire, and just by taking a quick look at the tire, it'll already tell you quite a lot about what it's capable of. Now, I had two main criteria for this particular tire, especially when it came to the 700C. I wanted good grip, and because of my success with the 650B, I knew that that would not be an issue. But the other requirement was a little bit more speed. I needed some additional speed on the gravel roads, knowing that I was going to take this to a few of the races that were coming up in this riding season. Now, let's look at the tread pattern. I'm going to break down those two things, both the speed and the grip requirement, and I'll tell you what my thinking was when it came to selecting this tire and why I thought, at least in theory, it was going to meet my demands. Now, taking a look at the tread pattern, you can see that the outer knobs are fairly aggressive. They've got a good height to them, they're well spaced out to the outer edges of this tire, and that on paper at least gives you a lot of cornering confidence. Leaning it into aggressive corners, you'll have enough bite on that outer edge to keep you upright. Then from the speed requirement perspective, that is where I relied a lot on that center thread. When I looked at these tires online just before purchasing them, I figured that that center thread and the very tightly spaced knobs around the middle part of the tire would at least give me a little bit more speed, and that narrow contact surface that it will have with something like a paved road or maybe a smoother gravel road will give me what I need in terms of the speed. Now, I have Two more things that I want to mention just before I get into that real world experience, and that is the tire fitment and also the weight. Now if you have a look at the weight of these tires, they came in a little lighter than the 40mm size, and that is sort of some of my thinking that went into picking the 35mm over and above the 40. Again, I think this is just my roadie side kind of stepping into that trap that thinks that speed relates back to weight and also slimmer size. I got taught a few lessons throughout the last few months of riding, and that is that the weight and also the slimmer size definitely are not the only driving factors when it comes to speed on gravel. Suppleness and stability, which we're going to touch on later, is definitely much more important than that weight characteristic. But mentioning the weight, this tire comes in at a claimed weight of 445 grams. I weighed it only after the 800 miles of riding with this tire, and I still got it at 455 grams. So maybe a little overstated in terms of the lightness of this tire. The step up to that, the 40mm size, they come in at around 500 grams. So for me, again, stepping into that trap, I thought that that additional weight saving will naturally equate to a faster speed. Not always the case. The other aspect I just want to mention with this tire was the fitment, and this is something that you definitely have to keep in mind when you are going to be fitting this tire, and that is that the rim profile plays a major part in how easy it is to fit this tire. Currently I've got this tire fitted to my older wheel set, which is the Fulcrum Racing 7 wheel set. Now this only measures in at a 19mm internal rim width, and it was a struggle to get it on this tire, at least originally. Since then it's kind of settled in and it's stretched out a little bit, so a little easier now to put it on and off than that very first time, but getting it onto a 19mm internal rim width was a pain. A couple of months later I decided to ditch this wheel set and I went for a DT Swiss G1800 wheel set. That one's got a 24mm internal rim width, and it was a complete different story fitting the tire onto that wheel set. With this one, the narrower wheel set, I had to rely on a compressor pump to get this tire seated, whereas with the DT Swiss wheel set and the wider rim profile, I could easily seat it with a track floor pump. So keep that in mind that when you're looking at these tires, given that it's a narrower tire, a narrow rim width does not play all that well with this particular tire. It also made a difference in the way they inflate it. This one inflates to just a hair under the stated 35mm, whereas on the DT Swiss with the wider rim profile, there I got it at just over 36mm. So it makes a difference in how that tire sits and also gets fitted to the rim, based on that internal rim width. Now let's get into the real world experiences, and I'm going to talk to you about sort of 5 or 6 key areas. I want to touch on that speed, the grip. I'm going to look at the stability and the suppleness of this tire, kind of as a holistic concept. We're going to look at the puncture protection and also the durability in this review. So let's get into that next and talk about the main real world experiences with this tire out on the gravel. Right, so as I mentioned at the outset of this video, the 650 by 50mm tire has done a phenomenal job, and I've been really pleased and impressed with the performance that I've got out of that set of tires. On the other hand, the 700 by 35C tire hasn't quite lived up to my expectations. First of all, looking at the grip, there, as I said, with the tread pattern, it definitely lives up to that characteristic and has done a phenomenal job. If you look at some of my races that I went into, some heavy extreme hill climbs there at Gravista, or even my Gruss gravel race that you'll find in that playlist below, there it did a stellar job on the uphill portions. There was a loose, rocky kind of gravel climb that required a lot of traction, spinning that lighter, easier gears. With that, still did an excellent job. The downhills, that's a different story altogether, and I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. Now, in terms of the speed, I think this is my biggest disappointment with this particular tire. I figured that going for the slimmest tire size would solve my issues and make it a faster tire just in being a slimmer tire. That was not the case. If you look at these two tires, side by side, the 650 and the 700C tire, you'll notice that when you start shrinking down that tire casing, what happens is that you also start shrinking down that center thread line. And that is exactly what my letdown was with the 700C. It just doesn't have that big of a contact patch down the middle of the tire. It gives you that fast rolling that I desired. If you look at something maybe like a Specialized Pathfinder tire, that smooth center thread that it's got down the middle of the tire, that is not what you get with this Pirelli tire. It's not the same profile whatsoever. That outer knob still sticks into the ground a little bit more than I anticipated, making for a slower riding experience. One other noticeable thing with the Pirelli Cinturato Gravel M tires and that very aggressive tread pattern is that it creates a lot of wind resistance. You'll definitely hear this tire when you ride with it for the first time. On a fast descent, that wind noise coming off of the front wheel is very noticeable. So keep that in mind, that this did not live up to my requirements for a fast tire. It does have some other things going for it, but before we get to that, let's look at the major drawdown for me with this tire, and that is the fact that it wasn't quite as supple as I hoped that it would be. This comes down in large part to that tire size choice. I went for the 35, hoping that it would be a faster tire, but on gravel, you've got to factor in how wide that tire is, the lower pressures that you can achieve with a tire on the gravel, and how that translates into your rolling efficiency on gravel. It's something that I had to learn over the last few months, and if I could do it again, I would go for the 40 millimeter, possibly even the 45 if that could have fit in my frame with this particular tire. Knowing now that the speed on gravel has a lot more to do with how well you can maintain your rolling resistance, and that comes down to the ability to keep that constant contact with the ground, not just bouncing around and losing efficiency as a result. So not quite living up to my expectations in terms of the suppleness. This is a very hard casing as well. It's a very durable, very strong casing, but with that tire casing, you don't get the soft, smooth ride that I was hoping for. It also comes down to the pressure ratings that you can run on this particular tire. It's stated from a 43 psi all the way through to a 72 psi. I felt that I had to go way below that range to get it anywhere near comfortable, especially when the terrain got a little bit chunkier. So this is a tire where the suppleness didn't quite live up to what I was hoping for. In terms of the stability, there again, the narrower casing makes it a lot harder to ride. You've got to have your bike handling skills on par. You're not just going to lean into corners as aggressively as you might have done on a wider tire. I've seen this now firsthand, the difference between this 650B and the 700C size. With this one, I can quite comfortably fly down some dangerous downhills here in a local riding area that I've got. I'm not going to try the same thing with this narrower tire. It just doesn't give you that same type of cornering confidence that you get with a wider tire. So in terms of stability, you've got to know that there's a price to be paid when you're going with a narrow tire. And for that reason, again, I think a 40 would have served me better. Now we come over to some of the positives of this, because what it lacks in the one area in terms of the stability and the suppleness, it makes up in two other areas, which is the puncture protection and the durability. So as I mentioned, the casing is very well made. It's a super durable casing, and this thing is going to stand up to quite a lot of riding. Even now, after 800 miles or 1,300 kilometers of riding, the tread has not worn out all that much. I still think that there's quite a lot of life left in this tire, and I'll be able to ride it for many more months. So in terms of the durability, it definitely lives up to the job. So the sacrifice, a little bit more on comfort and suppleness, but you do make that up in a tire that's going to last you over the long term. Then in terms of the puncture protection, that durability characteristic of this tire really shines, and I can't say that I've had any major puncture issues. There was one particular puncture that didn't seal all the way. The sealant would sort of block the hole, but it would reopen after a bit more riding. After a couple of rounds where I got tired of cleaning off the sealant from my bike, I figured I was just going to plug the hole, and that did the job. No more puncture issues since that day. So one puncture out of about 800 miles or 1300 kilometers of riding, especially given the terrain that I've taken these tires over. I would say that is a fairly good job in terms of puncture protection. So as you might have heard, quite a few things going for this tire, but at the same time a couple of letdowns when it comes to this particular tire, especially so in that 35mm tire choice. I would say if you're somebody looking for excellent grip, lots of durability and extra puncture protection, then this is obviously a great tire for you, which would be the majority of riders out there. But I would then caution to not necessarily go for the 35mm size alone. I think the only time that you would necessarily need that 35mm is if you are particularly picky about your weight on your tire, or maybe you've got some limitations in terms of tire clearance in your frame. Then obviously a 35C would work just great. Other than that, I think the majority of riders out there will be much better off going for that bigger volume tire, maybe a 40 or 45 if you can clear that even. You're going to find that you can have just a lot more stability given the wider profile of the tire, but also that lack of suppleness can be overcome to some degree given the fact that you can run those bigger tires at lower pressures. And that is what I found when I looked at the 650 B1. Running this tire at a lower pressure makes the whole world of difference. The feel on this tire versus the feel on the 700 by 35C tires, two different worlds altogether. At the end of the day, this is still a very, very capable tire. Don't get me wrong, this is a really good tire, especially if you're looking for something that is capable on just about any sort of terrain. You can put it on your bike, a little bit of a set and forget type of tire, and not worry about what the terrain is going to throw at you. The downside to that is that it's a bit of a jack of all trade, master of none. It doesn't exactly excel in any particular area, making it good for general use, but not necessarily so if you're looking for a fast tire that can be good in a dedicated area of riding. That's it from my side. I hope you enjoyed this look at the Pirelli Cinturato Gravel M tire today. If you did, please be sure to give this video a like and do subscribe to this channel. We'll be back in the future with lots more gravel product reviews.